Welcome to the Books on Air podcast. I'm Suzanne Harris, and my listeners get the secret story behind every book. Joining me today is Elizabeth Chapman, and she's here to talk about her book, The Tradition of the Path, A Modern Practice of Witchcraft. Elizabeth, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. This is so interesting. I can't wait to talk with you. Now, you have a co-author. You wrote the book along with Sue Weber. Tell me how this book came into being and how you and Sue worked together.
Okay, well, we have been practicing witchcraft together for almost 20 years, and it seemed like we have collected a lot of stuff and kind of figured out how we practice and how we look at the universe and so on. And we decided that maybe it was time to share that with some other people who could maybe be introduced to what we do or disagree with what we do and just enjoy the world knowing that we're out there.
Well, I know that at first you really didn't want to write this book. You say that in the introduction.
Yes.
And the universe sort of said, hello, yes, I think you need to write this book. So what pushed you and Sue forward to go ahead and do this?
Well, as I said, the universe kind of bangs me over the head with what we jokingly refer to as the cosmic 2x4, when I'm supposed to pay attention to what I'm supposed to do. And when we sat down and started organizing everything, we realized we really had a lot of stuff. And the biggest part was trying to figure out how to combine it into a book that would make sense for people to read and put information out there that would allow people to learn about us or use the information in their own practices.
Well, several things struck me about the book. First of all, it's 332 pages. This is crammed with information. And secondly, which one of you is the poet? At the end of each one of the sections, there's in bold print sort of a summary of what was covered in the section, but the wording is very different. It flows very differently, and it's very beautifully written. It doesn't rhyme, but it's almost poetic. Who wrote that?
That was actually me. I'll plead guilty.
Wow.
It's when you look at it all together, it's in the book as well, under the Creed of the Path. And it's, for want of a better word, it's kind of a summary of all of our beliefs and all of our practices kind of boiled down to its most basic. So that if we were to give it to somebody to read, somebody asked us, well, what do you guys believe and do? We could hand them that to start with and say, okay, this is it at its most basic level. What do you want to know from here?
Okay.
And yes, we did. The book actually wrote itself in terms of being divided up into those sections. Because we had the creed first, and then everything we wrote kind of, okay, this goes with this goes with this, and it all, literally, once we wrote all that part where you were talking about the poem, everything had a spot.
Well, your verbiage, you're quite good with words. It struck me. I'm a former English teacher, so when I came to that, I thought, oh, and I started reading, and I sort of looked forward after that to each one of those at the end of each section. Now, let's give the listeners some ideas about what's in the book. And I think that one of the things you really need to talk about is to define witchcraft in terms of what you guys mean. Because you and I both know that when someone hears that word, there are all kinds of images and things that come into their heads. So what's the definition that you're using for witchcraft in this book?
Okay, we think of it in terms of we develop relationships with the energies around us, things like the elements and the old gods and the ancestors. And we work with that energy, with their permission, obviously. And we create rituals and magic. And the ending goal of all of that is our own personal spiritual growth and development. We're not out there to convince other people that they should be doing what we're doing. We don't cast spells where people are going to lose their free will, which is always a big, if you watch TV witches and so on, they tend to take over people. We don't do that. We're just quietly trying to become better people. And it seems to work for us.
I think all of this got started, so long ago when actually people were healers. They actually knew about herbs, and they actually helped make people better. And then all of a sudden, the Salem witch trials came along, and everything changed. It's very interesting. Now, one of the images that you use that's a strong one is the path. That's in your title. Tell me what that means.
Okay, for us, we are walking a path. We honestly believe that every human being has an internal spark of divine. You can call it a soul, a spirit, whatever you want, that kind of longs to connect with the grand divine of the universe, which we don't name because it's so far beyond human understanding that you can't. But everybody has that desire, and everybody has to find their own way to make that connection. And it can be one of the monotheistic religions, it could be witchcraft, it could be whatever you want to call it. We call it the path because we think we are heading in that direction. At least we're hopeful, because you never really know. But the idea that we have somewhere to go, and that's why we call it the path. And we originally, called it our own spiritual path kind of thing. And then we realized that what we're doing is we are creating a path.
Yeah, I mean, we all are in a way, because we're all walking down the path of life. And so that image really resonated with me. I understood it immediately and had a mental image of a path. It's just sort of interesting that happened. The book is basically divided into 4 parts. Let's give a little bit of an overview of those 4 parts.
Okay. Well, first is what we call Metaphysical Kernels of Thought, which is a fancy way of saying, okay, this is what we think about various topics that are witchcraft related and energy related and practice related. And they're not super long. I think there's 72 or 73 of them, something like that. And they're divided up so that people can go in and read in little chunks about what we do. We've also included a whole bunch of some of our rituals, which people are free to use, take parts of to use, enjoy, just read if they want, so that people can actually see what we do. They can read what we're doing out there in the backyard or in the park or whatever, and recognize, no, we're not out there trying to take over the world. There's a brief part where we have included some of our liturgy, which we use as parts of our rituals, as prayers, as individuals, and we're actually creating a liturgy book at the moment that has all of it in it, because we just did a sampling. Otherwise, the book would have been even bigger. And then lastly, we tend to work a lot with crystals and stones and their energies, and we included some of our associations for those. So that's kind of the book in a nutshell.
Now, you also have 8 core beliefs that you talk about.
Yes, we do.
See, I really did read this. I really do know.
I appreciate that. It's wonderful to see, and I'm glad you enjoyed the book as well. We do. We have, that's kind of where it all started, is as part of our practice, we regularly go through and kind of check our beliefs for ourselves. Does this still work for us? Because if we believe as spiritual people, we're constantly growing and changing. So that we want to make sure that what we believe today still works for what we believe last week and next week and tomorrow, kind of thing. So that we have kind of distilled it down to, like you said, those 8 core beliefs, including we work with the divine, we work with the energy of what we call the old gods, and those are the gods that have always kind of been around in various cultures under various names for a better idea. We truly value balance. We honestly believe that the whole light, dark, good, evil doesn't work. It's just the points in between, and you have to have both, because you can't appreciate one without the other. And we work with the yearly solar cycle. Many pagans and witches practice in terms of celebrating the changing seasons, for another better way of putting it. And we do solstices and equinoxes. And we also have what we call cross-quarter times. And some people celebrate those as specific days, and we tend to celebrate them as seasons in between each other where things change. And we believe that obviously the world itself and all space is sacred, and that there are actually spirits of place that we choose to call genus loci that may choose to work with us or not, depending on their mood, because we don't always want to practice either. So why should the energies, and it kind of works out from there.
One thing that struck me as I was reading is the flow. I know that we talked about flow earlier, and the idea about how the year flows, how the energies flow, the moon, all the cycles really struck me as I started to read through this. And I thought, yeah, because you could see how the energies change and how it's different. And you also have a big discussion about the 4 elements plus 1, which I thought was very interesting as well.
I think so. We believe that there are 4 basic physical elements: air, fire, water, earth, and I think it's kind of descended from the ancient. The ideas come from the ancient Greek, and those, when you think about it, all of those energies combine to make everything in the natural world around us. And when we work with them, we have to put our spirit into it, or we are not going to be able to create anything. And I think for the universe itself, that's the divine is truly the creator, because whatever it is, male, female, we don't think of it in those terms, puts their creative energy into constantly creating a changing universe. So we work to kind of get into that flow of energies, as you put it, to create change within ourselves.
It's just so interesting. I find this the book itself is quite thought-provoking. And there were so many new words and new ideas for me in the book. For me, whenever I do these interviews, there's a quote for me from Oliver Wendell Holmes that sort of drives almost everything that I do. Oliver Wendell Holmes once said, "The human mind, once stretched to a new idea, never returns to its original dimensions." And I'm one of those people, I'm like a sponge. I like to absorb new ideas and new ways of thinking and, sort of reach out. And this book was a thought provoker because you gave me new words, new ways to think about things. And thanks. I mean, I think you did a really nice job with this. You and Sue did a great job.
Well, thank you. One of the reasons we wrote the book is, as you said, there are so many misconceptions about witchcraft out there.
Right.
And by putting out what we think about things and letting people see that we're not really that different than anybody else, we want to have spiritual growth. We want to, as you said, stretch to new ideas and new ways of doing things. And I think we're reconnecting with these energies allows us to kind of reconnect with the world itself. I think that's one of the problems with modern society and the problems with climate change and all of that, is that we're not connected like we used to be. When you think about, thousands of years ago or even hundreds of years ago, people were much more aware of the changing seasons and the cycles of the moon and the weather and all of that, because it was so necessary for survival. And we've kind of lost that, I think, in a lot of ways. And one of the big things we've discovered is we're much more aware of the patterns of nature and the way things flow and change and where the moon is at the moment and all of that kind of stuff than we used to be.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, because let's face it, we can't see the stars in most places. If you live in any kind, if you live in any kind of city, you really can't see the stars. You can see a few. I mean, we live in a metropolitan area, and whenever there are events that are occurring, I always like to look at those things and see what they look like. But from here, it's very difficult to do because there's so much light pollution. You can't see the heavens.
I agree. And I find it interesting that if there's a power blackout, how much brighter the stars are.
It's amazing, isn't it?
It's like, those were out there all the time. I think that's one of the best parts of what we do, is that we are constantly making these kind of personal discoveries that, things are right there. And we tend to have a lot of what we call synchronicities go on around us, where things just kind of line up in a way that, okay, we know we're going in the right direction. And learning how to watch for those and be aware of them and just connecting the dots has been an interesting process sometimes. And